Sentire Media.
Welcome back to another episode of A New Life in Italy. I'm your host, Samantha Wilson, and today we are pouring ourselves into the world of Italian wine, a vital and vibrant part of Italy's heritage. Now, I'm going to let you in on a little secret of mine. I'm supposed to be retired. Yeah, it's true. Retired. I know. It doesn't feel like it. It doesn't feel like it to me most of the time either. But you see, I moved to Italy many years ago to do two things. The first thing was to do, pretty much nothing and just slow down. And the other thing was to try every Italian wine there was. And for the first few years, I can tell you I was doing a pretty good job. As you know, Italy has some of the most incredible wines in the world. In fact, Italy produces more wine than any other country in the world. And they have over 3,000 grape varieties with 330 DOC wines, those are the good ones, to choose from. And tasting all of them, as you can imagine, has been no small task. Now, I've always loved wine and would love to learn about wine, but in a more practical and easy and useful way. And I didn't know how to do this until one day, not too long ago, I stumbled across an Instagram account and everything changed. I'm Samantha Wilson, Chief Dream Maker at smartmoveitaly.com, and this is A New Life in Italy, a show where each week I take you behind the scenes of what it's really like to move to Italy, introduce you to some fascinating people, answer your questions, and show you how starting a new life in Bel Paese is possible for you. I have always loved wine. Even as a teenager, I was that one at the party that was drinking a bottle of wine, or a glass of wine, I should say. When everyone else had a Molson Canadian in their hand, I always had a glass of wine. Now, my dad used to order me when I was a kid, I remember, a little Shirley Temple. And he would spike it with Mateus, which is that sweet, like a rosé wine. Just a splash, mind you, but I loved the sweetness. And for me, certain wines remind me of the past or a time in my life. Sometimes they remind me of an experience or certain people, my friends or my family, and most importantly, the moments that we have shared together. Wine to me, sharing a glass of wine or a bottle of wine with a bunch of friends is like a community experience to me. But admittedly, I never really took a lot of time to learn about wine. And honestly, since I've lived in Italy, I've been a little bit embarrassed about this because it seems that, everybody seems to know something more than I do about wine. I mean, I've always wanted to know more, but I always felt that the wine industry itself was a little bit of a mystery. And the learning curve was super, super steep. So unless I really dedicated myself and just absorbed everything there was about wine and the wine industry, then I knew that I would always just be a little bit on the outside. I would never be one of those people that you see swirling their glasses in a restaurant and looking at the legs on the side of it, or even flipping through those super thick wine lists that are so impressive. But you have no idea what you're looking at. You just point to anything that you think you know. Now, in my search to learn a little bit more about wine in a more casual, easy, grassrootsy kind of way, I came across an Instagram account, and it's called Unpinned Wine. And the guy who runs this account, which is somebody I wish I had met many years ago, has this really interesting approach. His name is Ashwin Mattia, and he is a sommelier. Actually, he calls himself a recovering sommelier. And as you will see, he is super charismatic. And he is, of course, a wine expert and the host of Unpinned Wine. He's going to explain to you about the name later on. He is an American, but now lives full-time here in Florence. And it was the Sangiovese grape that drew him into the Italian way. Today, he is my guest, and he is going to share insights into his personal journey into the world of wine, of course, that and Florence. We're going to talk about the cultural transitions that led him from the U.S. to here, to Italy, and how immersing himself in different wine cultures has reshaped his understanding of this age-old beverage. So, let's raise our glasses and welcome Ashwin to share his story and expertise on what makes Italian wine a key to understanding the heart and the soul of this country. Well, welcome, Ashwin. I am so excited to have you on this show today because, well, for a couple of reasons. One, you are my neighbor. You're here in Florence, which I know that we have a lot in common that way. But I think we also have a lot in common just through wine because earlier on in this episode, I guess I told everybody my little secret in that when I originally moved to Italy, the goal, of course, was to retire and try every single wine in Italy.
Whoa,
I know. I got
lofty
close.
goal.
I got close, but then I got a little wonky. So kind of had to stop. But anyway, for people who don't know you yet, tell them who you are and what you do.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me, Sam. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Ashwin. I was born in Chennai, India, raised in Atlanta, Georgia, and I now live in Florence, Italy. So I've kind of like covered two-thirds of the earth in terms of where I've spent time. I work in wine. So I teach about wine is primarily what I do. So it's a weird profession when I try to explain it to anyone. It's like, oh, do you sell wine? No, not really. Oh, are you a sommelier? Well, yes, but that's not what I do. My primary goal, and it's been this way for almost 10 years now, is to help people understand wine and by extension, understand their palate, their sense of taste a little bit better because wine can be really intimidating, especially in the US. I found it to be less the case here in Italy, but still to some extent. But it's intimidating, it's hard to understand, it's pretentious, it's snobby. People just expect you to know stuff about it and you never learned it anywhere. So that's what I do. Go
I
ahead.
love it because you've hit the nail on the head because I know that, I've had enough wine and different kinds of wines and I have my favorites for sure, but I don't know. Sometimes I'll just have a really good wine and I don't know why I really like it or why I can tell that it's really super, super good. But it just is. And if I go to a restaurant and they hand, the big, huge wine menu, I have no clue. So, what I want to talk about today, because Italy is about wine, right? And
Yeah.
because you've moved here and I love the term that you call yourself. You say you're a recovering sommelier. So first, let's talk about that. Explain that to me. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so it's a term that's caused some confusion. So we're not sure if it's working because it sounds like recovering alcoholic, which is not what we're going for. We're going more for recovering lawyer because there's the stereotype, that lawyers are dry and boring. I'm not saying all lawyers are, but there's that stereotype. And so then you say, I'm a recovering lawyer. I'm used to do that. Now I'm fun. So that was kind of the approach we were going for because of what I was alluding to earlier, that sommeliers tend to be perceived, not all of them are. I have a lot of friends who work in wine, but some of them, and the industry gets perceived as really uppity, really hard to penetrate, very judgy, cocky, even. And so I think what we try to do, what I try to do, is make wine very approachable, and that's why we say recovering sommelier. Back in DC, I'm talking close to a decade ago when I was living there, I would often open my wine tastings with, look, I drink Miller Lite and watch football. I just happen to really like wine. And that was my way of disarming people. It's like wine can be an everyday thing. You don't have to have, some large cellar or a lot of wealth or all the things you kind of associate or a lot of people associate with wine. So that's why we say recovering sommelier. It's like, I'm not an asshole. I just like wine. I know a decent amount about it. I've dedicated my life to studying it and I can teach you a lot about it if you're interested. And if you're not, that's totally cool too. Like just drink it and enjoy. That's also fine. That is a very respectable and understandable relationship to have with wine. So, yeah.
I really like this approach because you're right. Wine is, it's like an elite. It can be viewed as an elite thing if you don't know enough, because it's the whole pretentious sniff it and swirl it and taste it and spit it or whatever you want to do to it. Instead of just, knowing really what you like and what to the basic things to look for when you're trying something new, especially if you're traveling to Italy, you might have tried some wines, Italian wines back in your home country, and you want to explore them maybe straight from the vineyards here. So let's talk about that. Later, I do want to ask you about your move to Italy because I know people are wondering how you got here. But let's dive into the wine because that's, I think it's super interesting. So tell me about the wine culture in Florence and how is that different from the US?
That's a great question. It's so different. It's so different. And I think there are a few drivers of that. One is wine is so fundamental to culture, the food culture here and generally. And when I say here, I'm talking about Italy. And of course, Florence is no exception, given that we're 20, 30 minutes from Chianti Classico and an hour or two from Brunello. And, Bulgari is an hour and a half away. So like we're just surrounded by some world-class wines. Some of those I like a lot more than others. In the US, it's so sprawling, and the wine regions are kind of scattered. And in my opinion, there's a lot of manipulation that happens to the wines there. So it's you do more stuff to the grapes to get it to taste how you want it to, as opposed to letting the grapes kind of do what they want and then ending up in a bottle and you taste more of quote unquote terroir, which is a word I think that scares a lot of people, but basically just means you can taste the essence of the place in the bottle. So the people, the culture, the history, the land, the soil, the rain, etc. And so here in Florence, the couple of things that jump out that's very different from the cities I've lived in the U.S. Most of what you drink is from like 1, 2, 3 hills away. You don't have a whole lot of imported wine here because a lot of the world's best wine comes from here, and that could be a biased opinion. Some people think a lot of the French wines are superior.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We don't talk about French wine in Italy.
Great. Yeah. I don't, with the exception of champagne, which I just love. But so, yeah, it's very local driven. You're drinking mostly indigenous varietals to Italy, wines that are from the area. And if you're dining in trattorias and stuff, which we love to do, the table wine is often really quite good. And it's like some grandpa or grandma. It's just like the local farmer that's making wine, often just because they've been doing it for generations, and they like doing it and they want to have their own wine, and that's what you end up drinking. That whole concept of table wine just doesn't exist in the US really. And I've gotten flack before for quote unquote promoting or supporting table wines because they're not that complex, which they're not, and they're not meant to be. They're meant to be the kind of wine that you can drink every day, and it almost it's like borderline healthy, so long as you don't abuse it. So yeah, I hope that helps. I didn't directly answer the question, but I think I touched on a few things that hopefully shed light on it.
I think you're right. I think culturally wine is, it's just accepted. And it reminds me of a time I went for lunch, actually, in a little trattoria in Cortona. And we were sitting down there, and I always have wine at lunch, always. And yeah. And, so I have my wine, and I look over, and there's 2 policemen in full uniform sitting, having their lunch in the trattoria with a big, 1 liter bottle of the house wine.
Yeah.
And I thought, it's so funny. I mean, when you think about it, I guess they shouldn't be drinking a liter of wine when they're doing their job, but it's so culturally accepted. It's such a common, just another beverage to have, as long as you're not abusing it. And, and which we find here that, obviously there's some problems, but it's just not the same, as we don't look at wine here in the same way that we look at wine in North America.
Not at all. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's just so part of the fabric of society that you just can't take wine out of Italy and have the Italian experience. And I understand there's some people that don't drink for various reasons, and so we'll leave that aside. But
yeah, sure. But no, these are for the wine drinkers. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay. So tell me some. I know you mentioned a few of the more famous wines, but what are your favorite Italian wine varieties? And then maybe tell me a little bit about what makes them different.
Sure. So the most widely planted grape in Italy, and the most famous one is Sangiovese, which is what actually brought us to Italy, funnily enough. And I can tell you that story later if it makes sense. And Sangiovese, I think one of its best expressions is here in Toscana. I think most wine drinkers would probably agree that somewhere around Tuscany is where you find the best expression of Sangiovese, and you can find anything from like crazy full bodied, like, lots of sun, lots of alcohol, lots of heat, lots of complex dynamic aromas. You can find that end of the spectrum, all the way to light rosés made from Sangiovese that are minerally and summery and fun, all the way to like sparkling Sangiovese. And all of this you can find here in Tuscany, right? So almost made like champagne style. So champagne methods, secondary fermentation in the bottle, like light, explosive. So Sangiovese is something I love, and that's what brought us here. But the somewhat, I feel a little bit traitorous to say this. I've found myself more attracted to the Sicilian and the Northern Italian wines recently. Yeah, I've been drinking a lot of Nebbiolo, and I've been drinking a lot of Nero d'Avola from Sicily. And I think, yeah, I think what I like about both of them that you don't get as much of really with Sangiovese is kind of this minerally, um, kind of like sharpness. So when we're talking Nebbiolo and Piemonte, you're heading towards the Alpines. It's like just feels more almost, I would say, like direct, like a little, it like hits a little sharper, and is a little, generally tends to be a little bit lighter bodied. And so I've been drinking a lot of Nebbiolo. And then, yeah, in general, my wife and we drink a lot of volcanic wines from different parts of the world because you get, yeah, just all these like cool flavors. Like, I think they're cool. Some people think they're disgusting when you hear the word said out loud, but like asphalt or gravel, or, like the smell of, like if you're walking through like a stony creek, and you pick up one of those stones, that river rocks, that kind of smell, you find those kinds of things in a red wine, which is a little bit rare. You see that more in minerally white wines. So that's what draws us to Sicily. And then of course, we spent a few days in Sicily and ate our weight in cannoli and arancini in 3 days. So
of course, yeah. It's hard not to do that. Yeah. I've been there, done that. That's for sure. So, you know what? I want to know the story now. Tell me about the story. What brought you here? The Sangiovese grape.
Yeah. So I was living in DC. I was teaching about wine. I was doing a ton of in-person wine tastings, and there would be, DC is a fairly large wine market in the US. And so a lot of different winemakers come to visit. And so we had winemakers that came from Portugal, from Spain. And then of course we had a group of winemakers that came from Tuscany, from Italy, from Castellina and Chianti mostly. And I went to this, it was an industry tasting. So these winemakers come in, they do like a master class for a room full of wine professionals. And then, theoretically you'll want to talk about their wines more. Or if you're a wine buyer at a restaurant, you buy their wines. And I ended up meeting two winemakers, Monica from Fattoria Pomona in Castellina, and then Valerio, who's now at Tenuta di Carleone. And I like met them both. There were 5 winemakers. Those two, I just immediately felt like I wanted to be best friends with them, but I hadn't spoken Italian in years. And so I couldn't even muster a single sentence in Italian. And they lived halfway around the world. I lived in DC, they lived in Italy. So there's this like weird, I was like, I want to be best friends with you because you're amazing people. You make cool wines, you do what you love. But you live on the other side of the world and speak a different language. So how do you kind of reconcile this? And it just so happened that tasting was happening at a time when my wife and I were planning to spend 6 months abroad. So we wanted to go, we ended up living in Scotland, making whiskey. We lived in Georgia, the country where wine was born, exploring the history and origins of wine. That's actually what the documentary is about. In Pursuit of Flavor is about the birth of wine. And then we spent the remainder of the time here in Tuscany because we wanted to go spend time with those winemakers, with Valerio, with Monica, with other winemakers in the area, getting to know what I wrote to them was, I want to hear the doves singing that the vines hear. And I had no reason for why that was important. I just felt it in my body, in my chest, like, I got to go. And of course, my family, and they're like, what are you doing? My career was I still do some consulting work in the technology space and the finance space. And so, people that knew me it's like, why are you doing this? Like, where are you going? What are you doing? And you can't really explain it. Similar to when we chose to move permanently to Italy, which happened some years later. It's like, I can give you reasons, but those aren't the real thing. The real thing is I feel something. Yeah, I feel something in my body, in my bones, in my chest, in my heart that I cannot put into words. That just says, Ashwin, this is where you're meant to be right now. So anyway, that's how we first landed here was Sangiovese. It was after that tasting.
Oh, lovely story. I love that story. This is what we do. I'm so lucky because I get to talk to people like you and other people who have are able to articulate that feeling, that drive that pulls them here. And your pull, obviously it was because you love wine and it, you met some people that you connected with and you felt that you belonged to. So you were going towards that. And then you eventually, you said it was a couple of years though it took you before you actually made the move here.
Yeah, it's you know better than most that it's complicated. You don't just decide to move to Italy and then 1 month later you do it, or maybe you're such a wizard that's possible. But we actually, so when we were here for there are Schengen rules that you're allowed to be. Schengen is kind of most of mainland Europe, let's say, where you're allowed to be in that region, Italy's included, for 90 days in a 180-day period. So it's not like you can, I'm sure you know this. So you can come for 90 days, but then you have to leave for 90 days. It's not like you can leave for a day and come back. And so when we were staying, we were out a little further than Florence when we were here the first time in 2019. We stayed 88 days. And one of the, about a month into that stay, my wife and I, we looked at each other. We're sitting outside having tea, looking at the rolling hills. We were eating beautiful meals all the time. It's reasonably affordable. People are friendly, generally happier, a lot more connected to the earth and connected to each other. And we're kind of like, we don't really, do we want to go back? Like, do we really want to go back? And the answer is, we pretty quickly said, no, we don't. And so we went to this is like silly. And the US consulate is 3 doors down. So it's a really funny memory. I remember when we didn't know Florence that well, we like came in, we took a taxi or whatever, walked to the American consulate, tried to knock on the door, or buzz the button or whatever. And we're like, hey, we kind of want to move to Italy. Can you help us? And they, of course, were like, no. One, like, make an appointment. Two, you're talking to the wrong government.
Wrong people. Yeah, that's right.
And three, just go away. And so we're like, oh yeah, okay, these are all good points. So obviously we left so that we wouldn't violate the Schengen laws because we knew we wanted to come back. And then Savannah was a visiting fellow at a university, the European University Institute. This was maybe 3 or 4 years ago now. And following that, she ended up meeting someone whose husband was an immigration lawyer. And so it took all those steps because we wanted to move here. We tried to do it ourselves. Actually, the first time we went to the Italian embassy in Washington, D.C., got absolutely nowhere.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So you came over on a self-employment visa, I'm assuming.
I did. Yeah. That was the
like
eventual solution that we did not know that we needed until 3 years after we wanted it.
Yeah, I know. It can take some time to figure your way through, and you've been here for how long now?
We spent 6 months a year or so here since 2019, and we've been here permanently since summer of 2022. So about 2 years.
Yeah, nice. And are you ever going back? Do you think you could ever move back?
I mean, ever is always hard because when I moved to DC, I thought I was going to be there forever. I lasted 18 months. But right now, I have no desire to move back. Everything about my life here is better, with the one exception, which is my family and really close friends are in the US. And that part is hard.
Sure. But I'm sure they want to come visit as much as possible.
Exactly. It's not hard to convince people to come visit here. So yeah, no, we don't want to go back. I mean, we go to our macellaio and get we had, filetto for dinner last night. That was just the most beautiful steak you could ever imagine. It's affordable. It's fresh. He cuts it for you. Marco and Ricardo are our friends. Like, we see them 4 times a week. It's amazing. The community oriented nature of life and the value around what you put in your body is so high here, and it matches when I say our, Savannah and my values.
Yeah, exactly.
I put things in my body 3 or 4 times a day, probably more often, right? Coffee goes in a couple times a day, breakfast, lunch, juice, this, that. Like, I'm constantly putting things in my body, and here everything I put in my body is amazing, and it makes me feel amazing.
Yeah, I know. It is that those little teeny tiny things that are you do on a daily basis that you don't realize why you feel so good here, but it's the things that you're just not paying attention to, but the basis of them are just done better and designed better. But so tell me about how your transition here. So when you finally decided to move full time here to Florence, to Italy, how did that influence your perspective on wine?
That's a really cool question. I think there's one challenge with living in Italy when it comes to wine, which is it's hard to find non-Italian wines here. And it makes sense, right? The whole world travels to Italy for a lot of things, art, history, culture, but a lot of people travel for food and wine. And you could argue it's the best food in the world. You could argue it's the best wine in the world. So it makes sense that it's hard to find other wines. But that is a bit of a challenge for someone that is an exploratory wine drinker. Wine is my work, but it's also something I just love. And there's a lot of it on this planet. And so being in Florence, it actually makes me appreciate kind of the more global nature of wine in North America. Now, the global nature of wine in North America has a lot of drawbacks too, and I think the drawbacks outweigh the positives. But that's probably the biggest change. Is I'm here and I appreciate whenever I do find wines from Hungary or Slovenia or Croatia or Georgia, I appreciate them a lot more because they're more difficult to find. And I also, oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's like that. It's so local here that you have to, you're sort of completely encapsulated by Italian food and Italian wine. So something outside is cherished sometimes, or you really appreciate the diversity sometimes as well. Because Italian wine is delicious. Of course, it's fantastic. It's very well made. Some of the best wines in the world. So it's not hard to just stick with that, never do anything, never drink anything else.
Which happened for a while. We've got one of our best friends and favorite winemakers lives just across the river from us. And pretty much every time we hang out, we buy another case from her. We're just like, Ali, she makes Podere Capaccia and Rada. And I'm like, you're our house wine in the best way possible. Not as, not like, oh, your wine is bad. And you're our house wine in that, when we're eating dinner, eight nights out of 10 we're opening.
That's your go-to.
Which is awesome. But I do miss some of the Hungarian wines and the German wines and some, there's like some weird cool stuff in other parts of the world too. And I would love to see a little bit more of that here. But that would be serving mostly locals. It wouldn't serve tourists because tourists
exactly.
obviously
Tourists
want to come
want
here.
Italian.
Yeah, exactly. And I understand that. And that makes sense. But, there's some hundreds of thousands of us that live here permanently and don't mind something non-Tuscan every once in a while.
Yeah, for sure. Anything other than pishi ragu sometimes can be a good thing.
It's funny you say that. We're having ragu for dinner tonight.
Surprise. Yeah. All right. So finally, for some advice for some enthusiasts, so people who want to, know more about wine and how to deepen their appreciation of it, what advice do you offer? Like any resources, or experiences you could recommend?
So I think, am I allowed to plug Unpinned here?
Yeah, I want you to. Yeah, I want you to.
Cool.
Because I love it.
Awesome. So we created a course, we created an online course called Unpinned. It's called Unpinned because sommeliers who are wine professionals typically wear lapel pins on their jackets. And they tend to be, like I alluded to earlier, kind of intimidating, pretentious, blah, blah, blah. And so we call ourselves Unpinned because we're not that way. And so in the first chapter of Unpinned, you see me take off my sommelier lapel pin and put it down and be like, all right, we're going to teach you everything the industry doesn't want you to know about wine. And so I think we're an amazing resource. We charge $3.99 a month, so it's super cheap. We drop new content every month, and it is a product of 10 years of learning about wine, not from the people that sell it, excuse me, but from the people that make it. And that's a huge difference because most people that you will interact with in the wine world want to sell you wine. And so it's very hard to learn from someone that's trying to sell you something because they have an ulterior motive. My only purpose professionally in wine has always been teaching. And so then I have a very different perspective because I go learn from the people that make stuff and then I teach it to you, or not you, Sam, but just you, the general you. And so Unpinned is a great resource. We have a bunch of stuff for free. We have a blog, we have a free food and wine pairing mini course. Our Instagram is full of tips. Pretty much every day we're dropping new info there. So that's a great resource. Outside of that, go ahead.
I want to ask you about the Unpinned just a second. Inside, so are there like videos and lessons? Is it a course that people go through, or is it resources, or is it both?
It's both. So it's primarily a course that is constantly evolving. So right now we have, I think, 8 or 9 chapters, which is almost an hour and a half of video content. They're broken up and bite-sized, and they're produced in a fun and informative way, which I think is one of the big differentiators. Like we have a character called the Big Bad Somm that shows up, and it's kind of the, the archetype of what a sommelier is, and it's funny. And we focus everything is built around frameworks. So the challenge in wine is that most wine tastings are information heavy and knowledge light, in the sense that they will throw a bunch of scattered pieces of information at you, but none of it really sticks because it doesn't fit anywhere, right? Imagine if no one taught you how to add, but they told you that 3 plus 3 is 6 and 4 plus 4 is 8, and you had to remember all the different additions as opposed to just learning the concept of how to add. And that's what we do at Unpinned. I teach you how to add so that when you get other info in wine, it all makes sense. And the primary focus is around your palate. So what is happening in your mouth when you take a sip of wine? Because it's not just one thing. There's like 10 things that happen. And if you don't know what those things are, it's really hard to interpret what's going on and then communicate it to others. And so that's what we do.
Sounds perfect. Yeah. And it sounds like it's really because it's about this, unpretentious approach. It really is good for people who aren't, or maybe feel a little bit intimidated. Is it just Italian wine, or it must be all wines you're talking about? No, just wine in general. Yeah, good.
Yeah, it's wine in general. It's geared towards a global audience. So we happen to live in Italy because we love it here. But we're not so thick-headed to think that there are only good wines from here. So it's focused on all wines, and it's meant for kind of wine enthusiasts of all levels. There's some more technical stuff. We start with more of the basics, but we get in the weeds. We talk about winemaking and the different fermentations and whatnot. So, and then we do live tastings and virtual tastings, so people can ask me questions, which is actually the most fun.
And it's only how much did you say it was?
It's $3.99 a month. It's it's super cheap. It's super cheap. Again, we're trying to stick with this theme of making wine accessible.
Yeah, I love it. It's good.
Yeah.
It's great.
Hopefully anyone and everyone can get it.
Yeah, it's called Unpinned, and I'm going to put unpinned.com. I think they can get, that's your website, and I'll put the link. Unpinnedwine.com. And I will put the link in the show notes as well, and also to your Instagram and your personal one, so people can find it really easily. Okay, well, holy cow, I love this conversation. We're going to have to talk again because we're almost out of time, but I love it. Yeah, it's good. Well, maybe we need to talk in person because we are not looking at each other right now. We're so close too. Come into the studio. Yeah.
I'd love to. Definitely over a glass of wine next time.
Oh, well, twist my rubber arm. Maybe. Well, Ashwin, it's been so nice to chat with you. You're amazing, and I'm looking forward to chatting again. And I know everybody will love everything you have to say.
Awesome. Sam, thanks so much. It was lovely to be here. It was great to meet you. And I can't wait till we, actually shake hands and clink glasses in person.
It's time for listener questions. Just like the old radio call-in shows, my team has picked 3 listener questions, all left on our voicemail. I have no idea what these questions are, but I haven't been stumped yet. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Hi, Samantha. Is it possible, or should I, get the codice fiscale before my visa application and appointment that I have at the consulate?
Hi, Beverly. So the Codice Fiscale is the Italian tax ID number. And I've talked about this in the past, that it is a number that doesn't mean that you will pay tax in Italy, but it's a number that you need to do a lot of things, like register a contract for lease or purchase a property, open a bank account, really pretty much do everything. Think of it like your social security number, social insurance number, these kinds of things. You do not need your Codice Fiscale to apply for the elective residency visa. However, in order to apply for the elective residency visa, you will need a place to live. So that means you either need to have a registered lease in your name, a rental contract, or you will have purchased a property. And in order to do either one of those 2 things, you will need a Codice Fiscale. So yes, you will need to get it prior to your application for the purposes of your accommodation, not necessarily for the purchase of or for the purpose of applying for your visa.
Hi, Samantha. My name's Christine. I'm interested in the new digital nomad visa, and I see it's geared towards skilled remote workers. I'm a little confused whether I qualify. I do work remotely, but I'm a proper employee. I'm not an independent contractor, and I've heard people talking about this difference. Would I still qualify?
Hi, Christine. For the digital nomad visa, there's a distinct difference between remote worker and digital nomad. It's the same visa, but the qualifications and actually the application process is a little different depending on which bucket really that you fall in. If you are employed and your boss, your company that you work for gives you permission to work remotely from Italy, and you've been doing this remote work for at least 6 months, and of course you have a degree and all of the other qualifications, then you are a remote worker. So if you are employed with a contract and you have permission to work remotely, then you're a remote worker. If, on the other hand, you are self-employed or a freelancer with contracts that you've been working on remotely, then you would be the digital nomad version of the visa. But if you are employed, yeah, absolutely, you can apply.
Hello, Samantha. I've heard a lot about renovation bonuses and renovating my home or space in Italy. How do I go about doing and applying for those, and how exactly does all that work?
Good question. There's a few people who can help you with the bonuses. Every year, Italy has some kind of building bonuses. A few years ago, one of the real famous ones was the super bonus, the eco bonus for 110%, where, you could apply to get 110% back of your renovation, which was obviously incredible. And that was stopped for a lot of very valid reasons. But that doesn't mean there's not other bonuses. There's still all kinds of ones, particular ones to help with energy efficiency, as you mentioned. And there's some bonuses for gardening. And there's actually some bonuses even if you plan to operate a tourist business. There's ways that you can get some grants to help fund your renovations or improvements. Usually what happens is you have to go to your commercialista, and the bonuses, depending on the bonus, might need to be applied for at the time of the renovation through your architect or usually your architect or your geometra in combination with your commercialista. So you do need a few people to help you to ensure that you get these bonuses, which often are really given back as tax breaks in future tax years, usually over 10 years, but sometimes they're a little bit different. So it's best to first speak to your commercialista and get their direction. Well, that's all for this week's episode. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions about visas, citizenship, property, and really anything about moving to Italy that you would like me to answer in an upcoming episode, please feel free to send us a voicemail at our website at smartmoveitaly.com/podcast, or just click on the links in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and remember, you can find all of the resources and the links to the people and the places that I mentioned in this episode inside the show notes. Ciao for now. A New Life in Italy podcast is a production of Sentire Media, created and hosted by me, Samantha Wilson. Production by London Nero, and with special thanks to Ali Frothingham, Sofia Pisana, and the entire team at Sentire. Follow A New Life in Italy wherever you get your podcasts. And hey, if you're thinking of moving to Italy, whether full-time, part-time, or for a lifetime, come and see me over at smartmoveitaly.com, and we'll help you get here and start living your best life. And don't forget, if you love this episode, please rate and leave a review. It's much appreciated. I can't wait to meet up with you again next week, same time, same place. Ciao for now.
Sentire Media.
Hey, podcast producers and show hosts. Do you want to join a podcast network that celebrates all things Italian? At Sentire Media, we understand the allure of Italy and its unique culture. Our devoted team of hosts and producers are all driven by their shared passion for Italy. And we work tirelessly to create the best lifestyle podcasts and content that will whisk you away to the very heart of Italy. With us, you can savor the mouth-watering flavors, get lost in the stories from the past, break down the cultural barriers, and truly immerse yourself in the vibrant traditions of this intoxicating country. If you have a great podcast idea or are already in production and would like to join Sentire Media, head over to sentiremedia.com, that's SENTIRE media.com, and find out how to submit your show.